introduction. So Ben Fisch is going to talk to us about socially optimal mining.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm Ben Fisch. I'm from Stanford. And these are my co-authors here, Rafael from Cornell Tech, and Abhi Shelat from Northeastern. And I'll be talking about Bitcoin mining pools. So what is Bitcoin? I'm sure many of you have heard of Bitcoin, but I will just give a brief overview of Bitcoin at a high level. The details of Bitcoin aren't as so much important as the mining, which I'll describe, and extract the principles that are relevant to this talk. But first, at a high level, so Bitcoin's a distributed append-only ledger for peer-to-peer transactions. It's more than just a ledger; it's a ledger with rules. So you can think of it simply as implementing a state machine. Where each transaction appended gives some state transition. For example, party A is transferring a Bitcoin to party B, and valid transaction is a valid state transition if it satisfies certain rules, such as A owns the Bitcoin and has not previously spent it. So Bitcoin consensus is really just about doing state machine replication. So you have a network of nodes, and they all have a copy of the state machine, and they have to come to consensus on the state of the machine. But due to the nature of networks, even though transactions are broadcasted throughout the network, even different honest nodes in the network may hear different incompatible sequences of transactions in a different order. And so the problem of consensus is to come to agreement on a uniform view of what the sequence of transactions was, so that we can agree on what the state of the machine is. And you can also have malicious nodes that intentionally try to attack the system and say spend a coin and then try to overwrite it later on so that they can double spend a coin. So how do you achieve consensus in Bitcoin? So Bitcoin has a simple consensus rule. Each node selects the longest valid sequence of transactions that they've heard so far. Okay? And that is what they consider to be their current view of the state. Now, of course, that's not enough on its own. There's a form of a Sybil attack where it's cheap to generate transactions and build a longer chain if you're an adversary on this network. So you need to add some kind of cost to generating a sequence of transactions so that you can't intentionally confuse the network. So we use for this what's called a proof of work. And what is a proof of work? So first of all, the Bitcoin system has special users that are called miners. Okay, miners listen on the network for transactions. They assemble them into groups called blocks. And then to append a block of transactions to the ledger, they have to produce what's called this proof of work along with the block. And what this proof of work is, it's simply solving a computational puzzle that is tied to the block, and also the previous block of transactions that this block is being appended to. Specifically, the computational puzzle that's being solved is finding a pre-image of a cryptographically hard hash function, which is, so the inputs to the hash function will be some information about the block, some information about the previous block, and then there will be one field that the miner can play around with, this random value sampled from some domain, and they sample random values until they have a favorable hash value that is less than some target difficulty value d. The smaller this d is, then the harder it is to find a r such that this relation is satisfied. Now, because of the nature of the cryptographic hash function, it's thought that the best known way to do this is just by trial and error. You just sample different random r's until you get one that works. And if you successfully mine a block and produce a proof of work, then you get a reward. It's simply a transaction that can be included in the block that prints money to the miner. So that's great, but the problem for miners, if this is going to be your business to be a miner, is that mining has a huge variance. So miners only earn rewards when they successfully solve a proof of work, and this is just this Poisson process, this trial by error process. And so if you were going to try to mine today, you could go on Amazon, you could spend, say, $25,000 to buy 10 of these ASICs that are these specialized hardware devices that have been optimized for mining Bitcoin. And you could acquire a hash rate of 140 trillion hashes per second. But even so, in the current state of Bitcoin, it would still take you on average 305 days to earn any rewards. When you earn a reward, it will be a huge reward, but there's a high variance. And if you've worked for 305 days and you haven't gotten any reward, it's a Poisson process, so it's memoryless. You still have to work another 305 days on average before earning a reward, right? So this motivates miners to come together and pool their resources to reduce their variance by pooling the resources and sharing the earned rewards. Right? You can think if you're going to instead of buying lottery tickets on your own, you get together with a group of friends and you all buy lottery tickets together and then you share the rewards. You can each retain your same expected value, but now reduce your variance. But the problem is mining pools are not just you're not just getting together with a group of friends. It's not really effective enough. They tend to be these huge pools of pseudonymous users on the system that don't mutually trust each other. So you can't just trust pool users to honestly report their work to the pool. What stops a user from just keeping the rewards when it finds a block for itself? Or how do you prevent free riding where the miner says it's working for the pool, but it's not actually working for the pool, and it's just it's just earning rewards whenever other members find rewards. So what you need in a mining pool is some kind of reward allocation scheme that prevents these situations. So first of all, let me say how mining pools solve the problem of a miner just selfishly keeping the reward for itself. When you mine a block in Bitcoin, when you solve this proof of work, remember that you have to solve this computational puzzle that's tied to the block, right? And you put also in the block the reward that you're going to earn if you successfully solve this puzzle. So the miner is committing to the address that the reward is going to be paid to before attempting this proof of work. So when a miner mines for the pool, it's simply, mining for the pool would be committing to assigning the reward to the pool's address. So that's okay. But the more difficult problem is how you monitor the incremental work of miners who are participating in a pool. So the observation is that the nature of this computational puzzle is such that if you choose a slightly higher value or a much higher value, d prime, and you consider the probability that when the miner does this random trial to find this pre-image of the hash function, what is the probability that it will just be lower than this higher value d prime? Well, that will happen with much higher probability. And the miner doesn't have to do anything else. He's already solving this easier puzzle at the same time that he's trying to solve this harder puzzle. So we can call this solution to this easier puzzle a partial solution or a share. And the miners will submit their shares to the pool, and this will be a proxy for monitoring how much work they've been doing as they're working towards finding a full solution. So the principal question is, how should the block rewards be allocated to the pool participants based on the shares that they've submitted to the pool, so as to maximize their utility of participation? So let me just first go through some examples of mining pools. We have the simplest one is the proportional pay. It just says that you'd look at all the mining shares that have been submitted between the last block and the current block that's just won a reward, and you distribute the reward proportional to how many shares each miner has submitted, right? So here, miner A submitted 2 shares and then actually submitted the block, so they'll get 3/6, 1/2. Miner B submitted 2, so we'll get 1/3, etc. Another way you could allocate rewards is through the sliding window mechanism, where you distribute the reward over the preceding n shares that have been submitted before this block, even if it crosses over a previous block. So here in this example, miner A's share would win like 1/n fraction of the reward from miner C's block, but it will also win 1/n fraction of the reward when he himself mines a block 4 blocks down. You can think of this as a generalization of the previous method is just having some kind of weighting of the rewards and distributing the rewards over the previous shares. And an alternative weighting would be to exponentially discount the shares and distribute them over all previous shares. So this would be called a geometric pay scheme. You give 1/2, for example, the miner who submits the block keeps 1/2 of the reward, the previous one gets 1/4, the previous one gets 1/8, etc. And finally, there's a pay per share scheme, which is a very different kind of scheme. You can think of this as insurance. Basically, the pool will absorb all the variance. So the pool will collect the entire reward when a block is won, and then the pool bank will pay miners at some fixed rate for every partial solution that they submit. This is an interesting pool to consider, but this is actually not the type of pool that we're going to consider in our analysis in this work. It's a very different type of pool. It's not what we would call like a pure pooling mechanism where you're just trying to have a group of people come together and share the rewards, because here you have to assume some financier or some bank that can at some point incur a deficit, right? So mining pools in practice, the proportional pay pool has been discontinued, but some very popular pools, in fact the Ant pool, which is mining 25% of all Bitcoin, is using some of the schemes I mentioned. So let's take a look again at proportional pay. Why isn't this just giving you the best possible package deal as a miner? So first, suppose that all miners just commit to a single pool. They're just going to work for a single pool. Then what do you get from the proportional pay scheme? Well, miners are retaining their same expected reward. And the more miners you have in the pool, then the higher likelihood that the pool is going to solve a block in a given period of time. So the effect is that you're reducing the variance. And it seems that this is the best possible you can do. This is the principle of why reward sharing works in the first place. But the problem is that if you consider a miner who's participating in this pool, the marginal utility of submitting a new incremental piece of work on behalf of the pool may decrease as the state of the pool fluctuates, right? So, for example, if you know that a whole bunch of miners have already submitted shares where they were unsuccessful in producing a block, and so now they have some claim on the block that to be produced, then your expected reward from doing this extra bit of work is now decreased because you know you have to share it with this other dead weight that's already in the pool. So the question is, so how good, for example, is the proportional pay pool for a single shot miner who's just deciding to produce a single unit of work for some pool, and he wants to decide which pool to submit this unit of work to? So the goals and questions in our work here, first, to model the utility of producing a single share for a pool, taking into account the variance of rewards earned, right? So this would be measuring not just the expected reward, but the expected utility, which takes into account the variance if your utility function is risk averse. And also the delay in receiving rewards. So if you recall the sliding window pools, right? When you submit a share, you may be paid from future shares submitted to the pool, but this could take a long time. And so shares, incremental pieces of reward that you receive way in the future have to be discounted for their present value. And the question is, at the moment a miner decides to produce a share for a pool, which pool will they submit it to, which will maximize the utility of that individual share? So one thing is, recall that in the proportional pay, this utility may depend on what the current state of the pool is at the given moment, right? So we can ask instead a slightly refinement of this question, which is, what's the best pool to produce a share for in the average state? You can think of if Charlie can't actually see the state of the pool that he's in, but he still wants to decide which pool to submit a share to, right? Then which pool will he decide to produce this unit of work for? And we can assume that this is well defined. So we assume that this. So what we're really interested in looking at is the a priori expected utility of the kth share submitted to the pool, like, average over what the states might be in the kth position, and we want to assume that that expected utility converges. I'll discuss that assumption a little bit more, but let me first say, so what we call this the optimal steady state utility. And so let me just briefly say what some of our results are. So one thing that we found is that if you can solve this problem, right, if there exists a steady state optimal pool, then there is at least one such pool that is steady state optimal and has a fixed utility per share. So the interpretation of this theorem is saying that having a pool that has fluctuating utility doesn't help if what you're interested in is optimizing steady state optimality. But actually this theorem we prove is a bit stronger than this. It says that this optimal steady state pool, right, independent for any concave utility function, is actually a fixed rule pool. And what does that mean? It means that it has a simple allocation that distributes when a block is won, it distributes a fixed fraction of that reward to all the shares preceding the block. So this is really nice because it allows us to restrict ourselves when we're trying to find what the optimal pool is given a particular utility function and other parameters. We can restrict our consideration just to these fixed rule pools, which are much easier to deal with. They lead to much cleaner analysis, give like an easy convex optimization problem. And also fixed rule pools are nice because they're simple to design and they have nice properties. Like when we want to solve the more general problem of looking at incentive compatibility and competition in some other ecosystem of pools, then it's attractive that the utility doesn't fluctuate over the state. Because you're getting the same thing in every state. So if you want to participate in this pool, then that doesn't change over the state of the pool, so you won't necessarily want to pool hop to a different one. So the second theorem that we prove is that in the particular case of using the power utility function, right, so here, for example, it could be the square root of x. So alpha here determines the risk aversity of the miner who has this utility function. Then the geometric pool with certain parameters that depend on this on risk aversity is the steady state optimal pool. And so that's kind of nice because this geometric pool is one of the ones that's popularly used in practice, maybe not with the right parameters. But this gives a nice characterization of why that pool is in some sense the best pool in this stylized model. Now, I mentioned this restriction to steady state pools. All natural pools that we know of have this property. Like you can construct very unnatural pools that don't have this property, like a pool that would give all the rewards to the first share that was submitted to the pool, but that would be unnatural. Then that would clearly not be a fair scheme. So you can also look at this restriction as some kind of fairness criterion. So let me briefly say what some related work is. This is the first work to consider trying to look at optimizing the utility of submitting a single share of work to a pool. But there was previous work by Rosenfeld in 2011 on just giving an overview of different pools. He mentioned some of these different pool attacks. Then Leuenberg et al. Gave a cooperative game theoretic analysis and showed some impossibility results in certain conditions. And more recently, Shriver's et al. Studied the incentive compatibility of pools where, in a very particular game, where the miner is just participating in a single pool, but can either decide to report immediately a block to the pool or to delay reporting a block. And delaying reporting a block may, in certain cases, increase their expected rewards. So, for example, in a proportional pay pool, If you haven't produced a lot of shares, but you've now produced a block, then you may want to hold on to it and produce more shares so that you can get a higher proportion of those rewards. Okay, so I think my time is up, but I can, do I have time for questions? Or,
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's take this video first. So we have time for one quick question as the next speaker. Someone raise their hand.
So in those two results, are you assuming that the number of pools goes to infinity?
Sorry, say that again?
Do those results assume that the number of pools goes to infinity?
The number of pools goes to infinity. So which results here? The results that I'm
Theorems
talking
1 and
about?
2, yeah.
Okay, so the one that I'm talking about is not looking at the number of pools going to infinity. It's just saying that if you consider submitting a single share to a pool, which pool reward function will maximize the utility of that?
Okay, correct me if I'm not understanding this correctly,
Yeah.
but
So, specifically, like this is you just get a utility for a particular share in the expected discounted utility model, and then you get an objective function that you want to maximize.
But two different pools don't share their work with each other, right? So if you had a very small number of pools, then a pool which has done a lot more work also has a much higher probability of actually mining the correct block. Is that wrong?
No, that's not. I mean, you can certainly consider the competition between pools and dynamics between pools, but this is sort of a first step towards trying to solve the broader problem of a pool in competition with other pools, right? And also, you would want to consider incentive compatibility of the scheme itself, right? If there are multiple pools in parallel, then it may be the case that you will have hopping between pools. So this is not at all solving that whole problem, which is a very difficult problem. Like people have taken incremental steps towards proving it or analyzing it, and I would say that this is another step in that direction.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's move the speaker again.
Oh, yes. Okay, thank you.
So the next speaker is Xiang, and he's going to talk about limiting user Sybil attacks and resource sharing.
Okay, thank you, and thanks for coming. And I'm Xiang from Shanghai Jiao Tong University, and this is a joint work with Zhou, Chen, Yukun, Cheng, Xiaotie, Deng, and Qi. And today I will talk about the limiting user Sybil attack in resource sharing, and I will take some time to introduce the background and show you how the Sybil attack happens here. And after that, I will show some main results and insight of our proof, and finally conclude myself by the open problems. So firstly, the sharing economy has been very popular in recent years. Actually, we can regard it as exchange of services and resources, maybe offline, or both offline and online. We focus on this exchange happening in the network. We have Wi-Fi sharing community, the mobile data share applications, and many other applications. So in this scenario, the most important the feature of this scenario is that participants are both suppliers and consumers for the resource. So we model this scenario by a weighted undirected graph, where the vertices are agents, and if there is an edge between two agents, this means they can share resource to each other. And we use this vertices weighted function to represent the redundant resource for each agent to allocate it to its neighbors. And finally, the most important one is the agent's utility is the total resource he receives from his neighbors. So back to the problem. In the practical applications, there exists a centralized platform to managing this resource allocation. So we are considering whether we could replace this platform by a mechanism or maybe a network protocol. And so to do this, we need a mechanism that is fair to everyone. So how can we define the fairness in this problem? The main idea is that when an agent is providing more resource, he should receive more resource. And actually, this can be formalized as a formula, but maybe we can just look at this graph. That's when the agent V is receiving 2 units of resource from X and 1 unit of resource from Y. He can respond according to this proportion back to maybe he can allocate 2/3 of his resource back to X and 1/3 of his resource to Y. That's the meaning of proportional. And this is a response for this vertex, and actually other nodes can respond like in the similar way. And this may seem to be a dynamic process, but it has been proved that this dynamic process will lead to a market equilibrium. The equilibrium is in the following sense that each agent can attain their individual optimality under the constraint of budget constraint and market clearance. So I won't talk more details about this equilibrium, but I want to show you how this equilibrium looks like. So to do this, I need to introduce another characterization for this graph. It's named the bottleneck decomposition. We first introduce a threshold defined as this formula, and we will call it alpha ratio here. And maybe the formula is not easy to understand, but just say the graph again. And here we took this vertex as B class, and his neighbors will correspondingly belong to the C class. And it's the ratio between their weights is the alpha ratio. And actually, when we and this set will minimize this ratio among the graph. And actually, when we found the maximum this bottleneck decomposition for the bottleneck for the original graph, we can just take away this subset along with this neighborhood and get a subgraph and do this find this maximal bottleneck again until we can decomposite this graph into a series bottleneck pairs. Then actually in this this simple graph, there is only one pair of the bottleneck, and this alpha ratio is 11/100. And how it's related to the equilibrium? Actually. At the market equilibrium I introduced before, the utility for each agent can be calculated by the weight of the agent multiplied or divided by this alpha ratio. And actually, in this graph, still this graph, this is the market equilibrium I introduced for this graph, and the utility of for example, the utility for V1 and V2, V1 and V2 allocate all their resource to V3, and V3 allocate back his resource according to this proportion, and their utility can be calculated exactly with this formula. So now we got a fair mechanism, and we know how the equilibrium look like. We want to ask that this mechanism is this mechanism incentive compatible? When we consider the incentive compatible, we need to consider what strategic behavior could an agent do. Assuming I am an agent in the network, and which private information I can cheat, tell lies. So
what are the agents reporting?
Sorry?
So you're asking if it's incentive compatible. What are they reporting? What's the information?
I'm just meaning that when we're concerning whether the mechanism is incentive compatible, we are concerning whether we should first consider which private information an agent has, so he can tell lies about this private information. Okay, let's just show that. So firstly, I can tell lies about who is my neighbors, and that's neighborhoods in the network of myself is not known to everyone in the network, and actually it has been shown that such a strategy cannot benefit me. And the second one is how much resource I have. This may be easier to understand that I may not sharing all my resources to others. And it's also been proved that it cannot be, agents cannot benefit from that. And the final one is more interesting, that in the network, actually who I am is also private information. This we call it a cyber attack. This often happens in the security fields, but actually it's a simple scenario that an agent can copy itself into many different addresses and participate in the environment. And corresponding to this, our graph introduced before is just like a vertices split itself into duplicated nodes. Okay, and so does the mechanism is sorry.
So you mentioned that lying about the label doesn't help, also lying about the amount of resources you have actually doesn't help. What if the agent can lie about both? That this also doesn't help?
Yeah, that's a good question. And when this paper is published, many people ask about this. Actually, we see this in this way. When the agent lies about both of that, actually they are, well, this is, the proof is that when you're doing this, the utility you get is less than or equal to the original utility. And when you're doing this, the utility is less than or equal to the original utility. So you get a sequence of the inequalities for this two strategy. When you lie about both of this, you is actually lying one and following by another one, and the utility is also less than or equal to the original utility. So let's focus on this cyber attack strategy. And actually, I have a simple example to showing that this mechanism is not incentive compatible against this strategy. Here or maybe I forgot to tell that the numbers in the cycle means the weight this vertex has, and the numbers along this edge is the resource allocated to this direction. So in this example, originally for this vertex here saw we are showing the equilibrium for these two graphs, and originally this vertex received a 10 unit of resource, but after he split itself into two nodes, he receives 14 units in total. And actually, to formalize this cyber attacks, we need to know that a node can split itself at most to this D node, where D is his degree. That means how many neighbors he has. And each split node has a part of the original weight, and they sum up to the original weight. And since we know that this strategy this mechanism is not incentive compatible to this strategy, well, we are asking that how bad is this strategy will cost for the mechanism. So we introduce this concept of incentive ratio. Incentive ratio is a measure for the maximum utility one can get through strategic behavior divided by its original utility. Here is some related results for the incentive ratio. And the incentive ratio is first introduced when considering this misreporting utility functions in a Fisch market, and it's proved to be true for the linear and reactive utility, and 1.445 with the Cobb-Douglas utility. And the resource sharing problem is actually a subgroup of the L-Debrew market, and the general L-Debrew market with this misreporting utility function strategy has its incentive ratio is unbounded. And specific to the cyber attack strategy, It's first. Maybe it's the first known as the first name bid strategy in the sponsor search that the bidders could make pretend to be many first name and to participate in the job bidding. And it has been shown that the standard VCG mechanism is not incentive compatible against this strategy. And as I calculate that, the incentive ratio is also unbounded. And for the resource sharing problem, the best known upper bound to this incentive ratio is 2. And in this paper, we show that if the network of this resource sharing network is a complete graph, that's meaning everyone could share their resource to everyone, then the incentive ratio of the proportional response mechanism is exactly square root of 2. So here I just want to show a simple roadmap of our proof. And actually, it can be divided in several parts. Firstly, this is original graph or complete graph, and this is the results after this vertex split it to as much as possible. And we have shown that its maximal utility after playing this strategy will be attained when he split itself as much as possible. So then we can consider the bottleneck decomposition for both source graph, and maybe you can ignore this detail. And actually, with the combinatory proof, we show that when the agent gets its maximal utility after Sybil attack strategy, the bottleneck decomposition should be in this form. And we gave this algebra for this weight and convert it into optimization problems. We represent the utility functions with the algebra and solve this maximization problem analytically and show this upper bound is square root of 2. And for the lower bound, maybe it's easy to understand. Also, similar graph that's with carefully calculated weight. And we know that in this example, the incentive ratio is exactly square root of 2. So when the upper bound and the lower bound match, we know that this incentive ratio is exactly square root of 2. So finally, we are wondering what is incentive ratio for a general graph with no constraint about this complete graph. And actually, we do some numerical experiments for it. This random graph is taken as in this form, we picked a fixed number of the vertices, for example, 10. And the edges each edge between any of them, the two vertices, will occur independently according to this probability P. And for each P, we generate about 1,000 random graphs and to calculate its incentive ratio. And in this graph, we can see that actually there is a tendency for the incentive ratio against this probability. When the probability increases, it means the graph is more dense, that vertices are more connected with each other, and the incentive ratio would go down. And in all our numerical experiments, we haven't found any case that the incentive ratio exceeded 2. So we conjecture that the incentive ratio of this general graph is 2. So I will stop here and any questions? So maybe if you have other questions after that, you can contact me through email. Thank you.
Okay, so that's
Yeah, 套近一点可以。Okay. Okay, great.
So the next and last talk of this session is by Xiaotie. He's going to talk to us about scale effects in web search.
Okay, thanks for the nice introduction. So in this talk, I will report our study on scale effects in web search. This joint work with my colleagues Deng, Aadharsh, Chen, Preston, and Justin. Okay. So yeah, first of all, so you may heard about machine learning or artificial intelligence. They are very hot in recent years. Actually, the success of today's AI or machine learning depends on large-scale data. So the scale of data plays a very critical role in artificial intelligence. Here I show several applications. In those applications, actually AI has already beat human, even some top humans. For example, in image classification, usually a machine learning algorithm needs millions of labeled images for training. In speech recognition, thousands of hours of annotated voice data is needed for training. And for machine translation, usually tens of millions of bilingual sentence pairs are needed. In Go playing, so you may heard AlphaGo. So in Go playing, tens of millions of moves are needed for training, either from expert move or from self-play. Okay. So you may think that the scale of the data is very large, but actually it's not so large. So it is still possible that a new entrant of the market can produce better results than well-established market leader. For example, in August this year, DeepL, a startup company, so it claims that its translator beats both Google and Microsoft. So they use supercomputer, and they use a very large scale of training data. For example, a billion of bilingual sentence pairs. Currently, in those big companies, they may use tens or hundreds of millions of sentence pairs. Therefore, you can see even a startup company can collect maybe data that is an order larger than the big companies. Then how about search? Okay. So obviously, as data increases, search engines should improve. But the problem is that today, market leaders in search have very or huge scale of data. For example, a market leader may serve billions of searches per day. So in such a large scale, does the scale still matters? For example, if you serve 1 billion searches per day, and then you increase to 2 billion per day, will you get better results? Or is the scale effect saturated? And also, does the market leader have scale advantage over other players? For example, is it possible for a new entrant that can beat the well-established market leader? So this is what we are trying to study in this work. Our study have two aspects. First, we study the direct effects of scale. So we study how the search engine performance is related to the volume of historical data for a target query. So here, we use a click-through rate to measure or to evaluate the search engine performance. Because if a search engine can provide better search results, the user click rate will increase. And for historical data, we use a number of historical clicks to reflect this kind of information, because clicks are the most effective feedback or signals provided by search engine users. In the second aspect, we study the indirect effects of scale. Okay? So we explore the effects of data on related queries. Let's first go to the first study. So to study the direct effects, we collect some data. So our data are the search logs of two big search engines in North American market. So we collect about 1 calendar year of the logs. For the first provider, we have collect data for 2 providers. For the first provider, we collect searches for more than 200 billion, and it has clinics more than 100 billion. For the second provider, we collect searches more than 300 billion, and for clinics, it has more than 150 billion. So we partition the data into 2 parts. The first 3 months, we treat it as a benchmark data source. It will use in our later study. And the remaining 9 months are used as a target data source. So for each query queue and each day in the target data source, we get a pair, HQD and CTR-QD. So here, HQD is the historical clinics of query queue before day D, including the clinics in the benchmark data source. And the CTR-QD means the click-through rate of a query queue on day D. Okay. So then for each query, we have at most 270 pairs. Okay, because we have 9 months, and if this query appears on some day, then it will create a pair for this day. Okay, but if a query does not show up on some day, then it will has no such pair. Okay. Then we partition the order pairs into 10 buckets according to the historical clinics. The 10 buckets spans from 0 to 10, 10 to 100. The largest one is 10 million to 100 million clinics. Then we connect the average CTR in each bucket. So this is our basic setting. So here is the results. So you can see that, for example, this is the first bucket, the historical clinic from 0 to 10, 10 to 100. So you can see as the historical clinics increase, the CTR also increase. Okay. So even if we have millions of historical clinics, the CTR is still increases. So that means seems that the scale effect is not saturated yet. Okay. We further conduct regression analysis on the CTR. So we try different functions, including linear or polynomial. Finally, we find this formula fits best of the data. So we can say CTR somehow equals to alpha plus beta times square root of log clinic numbers. You can see for both search engines, the coefficient beta is positive. Especially you can see for provider 2, its beta is much larger than provider 1. Somehow, we may interpret that the second provider relies more on historical data or historical clinics. Okay. So overall, CTR has strong positive correlation with historical clinics. That means if a search engine have more clinics, then it will have a competitive advantage over the new entrant. Yeah.
Yes, we are considering the data is non-homogeneous, right? Images, the messages, and all. We are pairing them.
Pardon? So I didn't get your question.
The pair you are considering, right? But the data is non-homogeneous, right? The images, the messages, and different the data. How you are pairing that?
Sorry, I didn't get your point. So
the previous slide, you are pairing the data, right?
This previous one, this one.
Yeah.
Or partition the data into buckets. Yeah.
How you are considering the data as a pair?
It's query, yeah, query. So query and day.
But the data is images, the messages, and all. In the first, second slide, you consider as the data is like images.
Images? No, we do consider email. We only consider text queries. So yeah, good question. We only consider text queries.
Okay.
Yeah. So we do not include image or music or video searches. Yeah, thank you. And Okay, so actually there are two potential issues with previous study. First, actually the queries in the different buckets are different because we partition the queries, the query and the day, into different buckets according to different, according to historical clinics. Actually, you can think that many real queries, they have a few historical clinics in one calendar year. Therefore, for those queries, real queries, most likely they will fall into the left bucket. For those popular queries, they have many clinics, so most likely they will fall into the right buckets. Okay. So it is possible that the increase of the CTR curve is caused by the difficulty of the queries, because the real queries are more difficult and the popular queries may be relatively easier. Okay. So therefore, it would be perfect to study a fixed set of queries. Another potential possible issue is that the number of historical clinics actually is not accurate, because we only have one calendar year of data, because according to some regulation requirements, search engines cannot keep too long history of the search. So especially for popular queries, they have very long history and much longer than 1 year. So we cannot guarantee that the historical clinics are accurate. Okay. So therefore, it would be better to study newly emerged queries in the calendar year we collect the log. Therefore, we have the second study, duality effects on new or rare queries. So here we apply some filtration criteria so that we can select a subset of queries for both search engines. We have two criteria. The first one is that we require that a query has less than 200 clinics in the 3 months benchmark data source. So by these constraints, somehow we want to select queries that are relatively new or rare, because it have only a few clinics in 3 months period. And the second requirement is that the overall clinics in the calendar year or the 12 months is between 1,000 and 2,000. This requirement is to ensure that we only look at the early stage of the query, because if the query becomes very popular, we cannot observe the early increase or early effects of the scale. For example, if a new entry gets into a search market, how she can improve his search performance. So with these two selection criteria, we select 8,000 queries for the first provider and 10,000 queries for the second provider. So because we have no requirements that the query should appear in both providers, so there's no relationship between the queries in the first provider or the second provider. And also, actually, our log only a partial observation of both search engines. So this 8,000 or 10,000 is just a partial, maybe a subset of these queries. Okay. So now, because for all these queries, they have at least 1,000 clinics. Okay. So we similarly we partition them into buckets. So here the buckets spans from 100 to 200, 200 to 300, and the largest one is 900 to 1,000. We do not consider 1,000 to, for example, 1,100, because not all the queries in those sets have, for example, 1,000 and 100 queries, because the guarantee is that each query has at least 1,000 clinics. So we get 9 pairs. And we similarly, we partition the queries into buckets according to the historical clinics, and calculate the average CTR of the queries in each bucket. Okay. So currently, because we should know that we should pay attention that by applying this kind of selection, we can ensure that in each bucket the queries are the same. So we can avoid the difficulty between queries. Okay. So that's the trend or the pattern we observed is not affected by the different query sets. Here is the results of the new or real queries. Okay. So we still can observe CTR growth for new queries for both providers, but there are some noise. For example, for the rightmost bucket, the two buckets, we even observe some drop of the CTR. So one possible explanation is that because some query may have only, for example, 1,000 connects. That means the query may be get into the end of its lifetime. So at that time, it's because the query may be not attract any attention, so its clear rate will drop. But because of this kinds of lifetime issue, so it is possible that in the rightmost side, the CTR will decrease. But overall, especially if you look at the right sides, for example, the first 8 or 7 packets, the CTR increase. Okay. Another alternative explanation is that because when a query gets more searches, it's possible that some users may create more relevant web pages in the web, so that the CTR will get better because more web pages get into the index of a search engine. Actually, we check this issue, we find that among all the connected URLs, more than 97 or 98 of them are already in the search engine index before the beginning of the calendar year. Therefore, we conclude that the increase of CTR is not caused by the newly emerged or newly created web pages. Okay. So we further conduct some study about the indirect effects. Because that according to some study or according to some report, more than 20% daily queries are new. So for new queries, usually we do not have many historical connects. Therefore, historical connects do not make much sense. For this kind of queries, search engine usually leverage related queries, similar or semantic related queries, to help the ranking of a new query. Therefore, we should take indirect effects into account while studying scale effects, especially for those new queries. So we cluster those queries into internet groups, and based on the it's based on the query dominant click graph. We assume that the queries in the same group are related or relevant to each other. We try to also try to regret the CTR and the observations. We have two kinds of observations. The first one is direct clicks. That means clicks for this target query. The second one is indirect clicks. That means the clicks related to other queries in the same clustering group. Okay. So interestingly, we found that the coefficient of beta 1 is even larger than beta 2. That means for a new query, the related queries have more than its direct connects. Okay, yeah. Indirect connects. Okay, so indirectly means that because for a new query, we may find some similar query or related queries. So we check how many connects for those related queries. So we call those connects the connects numbers or the indirect connects. Yeah, so this just shows that indirect knowledge is important for long-tail queries. Actually, because for market leaders, they have a long history, they serve more people, they get much information or much knowledge about the user or about the queries. So usually they have competition advantages. Okay. So as a summary, our study shows that scale does matter for search, even for today's scale. For example, even for Google and Bing, you may think that both search engines have many traffic, so that maybe Google does not have advantage, or than Bing. Actually, it does have. And scale effect is not saturated yet, although the return is diminished, because from the regression curve, you can see the curve is somehow, the return is diminishing. And last, the indirect knowledge is important for solving new and rare queries. So for the future work, it's very important to consider other kinds of indirect knowledge, because there may be many set factors or many other knowledge can be used to help the ranking of a query. Here we only consider the related query through the query dominant click graph. It's a very simple methodology. Okay, so I will stop here. So any questions? I'm happy to take any questions. Okay, thank you.
We can take a tea coffee break now. Before that, I would like to announce that the proceedings are ready. They're outside. They can be copied onto your machines.